The guitar that wouldn't play. The amplifier hummed, but silence filled the venue like thick smoke. Kurt's fingers moved across the strings, but no sound emerged from the battered Fender Mustang hanging from his shoulder. 3,000 people waited in the dim amber light, their restless energy building with each passing second. It was supposed to be just another show at the Crocodile Cafe, the kind of intimate venue where sweat dripped from the low ceiling and the crowd pressed so close you could see the exhaustion in their eyes. Kurt adjusted the strap, checked the cable connection, and tried again. Nothing. Technical difficulties, he mumbled into the microphone, his voice carrying that familiar rasp that made hearts skip beats. The sound engineer frantically gestured from the booth, swapping cables and checking connections. Dave and Chris exchanged glances behind him, ready to fill the silence with something, anything. But Kurt had stopped moving entirely. The guitar felt different tonight, heavier. Not just the weight of wood and metal, but something deeper, something that seemed to pull at his chest. He'd bought it 3 days ago from a pawn shop on Pike Street. The owner, an elderly man with paint-stained fingers, had hesitated before handing it over. "This one's got history," the man had said, his voice barely above a whisper. Previous owner, well, let's just say it meant everything to him. Now, standing under the hot stage lights with 3,000 people growing impatient, Kurt understood what the man meant. The guitar wasn't broken. It was waiting. He looked down at the instrument. The finish was worn smooth in places where countless fingers had caressed it. Small scratches formed patterns that looked almost intentional, like someone had been writing songs directly into the wood. And there, just below the bridge, barely visible in the stage lighting, were 4 letters carved delicately into the body. Liam. The crowd began to murmur. Someone shouted for them to play something, anything, but Kurt remained frozen, staring at those 4 letters as if they held the secrets of the universe. Then he felt it, a vibration that didn't come from the amplifier or the stage monitors. It came from within the guitar itself, a gentle pulsing that matched the rhythm of his own heartbeat. His fingers found the strings again, not to play, but simply to touch. And in that touch, something extraordinary happened. The noise of the crowd faded, the hot lights dimmed. The world contracted to just Kurt and this guitar that wouldn't play. And in that silence, he heard something that made his breath catch in his throat. A voice. Soft, barely there, like wind through broken windows. "I never got to finish the song." Kurt's eyes snapped up, scanning the crowd, looking for whoever had spoken. But 3,000 faces stared back at him, all waiting, all wondering why the show hadn't started. He looked at Dave, at Chris. They hadn't heard anything. "Did you hear that?" he whispered into the microphone. The audience fell silent, leaning forward. Kurt's hands trembled slightly as he positioned his fingers on the frets. No sound came from the amplifier, but he could feel the strings vibrating against his fingertips. And in those vibrations, he felt something else. Emotion. Raw, unfiltered emotion that wasn't his own. Longing. Desperation. Love. Loss. "I was 23, the voice came again, clearer now, seeming to emanate from the guitar itself. "I had so much to say. So many songs left to write." This time, Kurt was certain. The voice wasn't coming from the crowd. It was coming from the instrument in his hands. He should have been terrified, should have dropped the guitar and run. Instead, he found himself leaning closer, pressing his ear against the body of the instrument. "What happened to you?" he whispered so quietly that even the front row couldn't hear. "The same thing that almost happened to you," came the reply. "The weight became too much. But I left this behind, my voice, my music, my hope that someone would finish what I started." The crowd was getting restless again. Someone shouted for them to get on with it. But Kurt couldn't move. He was trapped in a conversation that defied every law of reality, yet felt more real than anything he'd ever experienced. "Play with me," the voice pleaded. "Just once. Let me feel alive again." Kurt looked up at the audience. 3,000 faces, all waiting for him to entertain them, to give them something to sing along with, something to help them forget their own pain for a few hours. But tonight felt different. Tonight felt sacred. He walked to the edge of the stage and sat down, legs dangling over the side. The guitar rested across his lap, and he could feel that strange vibration growing stronger. Dave and Christ approached cautiously, unsure what was happening but ready to follow, wherever their friend was leading. "There's someone here with us," Kurt said into the microphone, his voice soft but carrying clearly through the PA system. Someone who never got to say goodbye. The venue fell completely silent. Even the bartender stopped pouring drinks. Kurt's fingers found a chord progression he'd never played before. Still no sound came from the amplifier, but somehow everyone in the room could feel the music. It resonated in their chests, in their bones, in the spaces between heartbeats. It was sad and beautiful and desperate and hopeful all at once. His name was Liam. Kurt continued, his voice breaking slightly. And he had songs he never got to share. As Kurt played the silent guitar, something miraculous began to happen. One by one, voices from the crowd began to hum. Not any particular melody, just sound. Raw human sound that filled the space where amplified music should have been. 3,000 people creating a symphony of empathy for someone they'd never met. Someone who existed now only in the resonance of worn guitar strings. Tears streamed down Kurt's face as he played. He could feel Liam's presence growing stronger, feel the joy of a musician who thought he'd never make music again. The chord progressions flowed through Kurt's fingers as if guided by someone else's memory, someone else's dreams. "Thank you," came the whisper, so faint now it might have been imagined. "Thank you for letting me play one last time." The humming from the crowd grew louder, more unified until it became something transcendent. Not a song exactly, but something deeper. A recognition that music exists beyond instruments, beyond amplifiers, beyond the physical world, that sometimes the most powerful performances happen in the silence between notes. Kurt played until his fingers ached, until the strange vibration in the guitar finally stilled. When he looked up, every person in the venue was crying. Not sad tears, but the kind of tears that come from witnessing something sacred, something that reminds you why being human is both terrible and beautiful. He stood slowly, cradling the guitar against his chest. The amplifier suddenly crackled to life, and when he strummed a simple chord, sound filled the room like sunlight after rain. But somehow, that didn't matter anymore. "Some souls," he said into the microphone, "leave parts of themselves behind in the things they loved most. Tonight, we helped one of them remember what it felt like to sing." The show that followed was unlike any other. Every song felt charged with something beyond entertainment, beyond performance. The guitar that wouldn't play had reminded everyone in that room that music isn't about the sound. It's about the connection, the sharing of something too deep for words. After the show, Kurt carefully placed the guitar in its case. As he closed the latches, he could have sworn he heard a final whisper. "The song is finished now." Walking out into the Seattle night, Kurt understood something he'd never understood before. Every instrument carries the ghost of everyone who ever played it. Every song contains the echo of every heart that ever felt it, and sometimes, if you're quiet enough, if you're willing to listen, you can hear all the music that was never made, waiting patiently for someone to give it voice. The guitar that wouldn't play had taught him that silence sometimes speaks louder than any amplifier ever could, but the story didn't end when the venue emptied. 3 days later, Kurt found himself back at the pawn shop on Pike Street. The elderly owner looked up from behind a cluttered counter, his paint-stained fingers wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. Recognition flickered in his weathered eyes. "You came back," the man said, setting down his cup. "I wondered if you would." Kurt placed the guitar case gently on the counter. "Tell me about Liam." The old man's face softened, decades of held emotion suddenly visible in the lines around his eyes. He walked to the back of the shop and returned with a shoebox filled with photographs, letters, and sheet music, all of it yellowed with age, all of it precious. "Liam Sullivan," he said, pulling out a black and white photograph of a young man with wild hair and intense eyes, holding the same Fender Mustang. "My nephew. Brilliant musician. Could make that guitar sing like nothing I'd ever heard." Kurt studied the photograph. The resemblance was uncanny, not in physical features, but in the way Liam held the instrument. Like it was an extension of his soul, like letting go would mean losing a piece of himself. "What happened to him?" Kurt asked, though part of him already knew. "The music industry chewed him up," the old man replied, his voice heavy with old grief. "Label executives who wanted to change his sound, producers who didn't understand what he was trying to say. He spent 3 years fighting for creative control, watching other artists succeed with watered-down versions of what he'd been doing for years. The old man pulled out a stack of handwritten lyrics, the paper soft from countless readings. He wrote constantly. Songs about alienation, about feeling like a ghost in your own life. Beautiful stuff, but too raw for commercial radio, too real. Kurt recognized something in those lyrics, something that echoed his own struggles with fame, say, with artistic integrity, with the weight of being misunderstood by the very industry that claimed to celebrate him. He read line after line of Liam's words, feeling a kinship across time with someone he'd never met. He played his last show at the off-ramp, the old man continued. Small crowd, maybe 50 people, but he poured everything into that performance, everything. When it was over, he came here and asked me to hold on to the guitar. Said he needed some time to figure things out. And then, he never came back. They found him a week later. The music had become too heavy to carry. Kurt closed his eyes, feeling the weight of Liam's story settling into his own bones. How many musicians had walked this path? How many had stood at the edge of that same cliff, looking down into the darkness that lived inside songs unsung? "Why are you telling me this?" Kurt asked. The old man smiled sadly. "Because when you played that guitar the other night, something changed. I could feel it from 6 blocks away. Liam's spirit. It was restless for 20 years. Always reaching out, always trying to connect, but that night, for the first time since he died, I felt peace." Kurt opened the guitar case and looked down at the instrument that had changed everything. In the afternoon light streaming through the shop window, the carved letters Liam seemed to glow softly against the worn wood. "He's not trapped anymore," the old man said. "You gave him what he never had in life, an audience that listened, really listened." Over the following weeks, Kurt found himself thinking constantly about Liam Sullivan. Researched everything he could find about the young musician, bootleg recordings, old interviews, reviews from underground music magazines. What he discovered was an artist ahead of his time, someone whose music predicted the grunge movement by a decade. Kurt began incorporating elements of Liam's unfinished songs into his own performances, not copying, but collaborating across the veil between life and death. Each concert became a conversation between past and present, between dreams deferred and dreams fulfilled. The guitar responded differently now. It played beautifully, but Kurt could still feel Liam's presence in the wood, in the tension of the strings, in the way certain chords resonated with otherworldly clarity. It was as if Liam had become part of the instrument's voice, adding depth and emotion that Kurt had never been able to achieve on his own. Fans began to notice the change. Concert reviews mentioned a new maturity in Kurt's playing, a haunting quality that made grown men cry and helped broken hearts remember how to heal. What they didn't know was that every song was now a duet, a partnership between a living artist and a spirit who had finally found his voice. 6 months after that night at the Crocodile Cafe, Kurt returned to the venue for another show. As he set up his equipment, he noticed a young woman in the front row holding a photograph. She approached the stage during sound check. "Excuse me," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I know this sounds crazy, but I think you knew my brother." She held up the photograph. It was Liam, the same image Kurt had seen in the pawn shop, but this copy was newer, better preserved. On the back, someone had written, "For Sarah, keep the music alive." "I was at your show 6 months ago," she continued, "when you talked about someone named Liam who never got to say goodbye. That was my brother. I've been looking for that guitar for 20 years. Kurt felt his world tilt slightly. The connection he'd felt with Liam suddenly expanded to include this woman, this sister, who had carried her own burden of loss for 2 decades. "He used to play me lullabies on that guitar," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. "After our parents died, when I had nightmares, he'd sit beside my bed and play until I fell asleep. I always wondered what happened to it." That night's performance became something transcendent. Kurt dedicated every song to Liam and through him to Sarah. The guitar sang with a clarity that seemed impossible, each note carrying 20 years of accumulated love, loss, and longing. When Kurt played the final chord, he could have sworn he felt Liam's hand on his shoulder, finally at peace. After the show, Kurt made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. He gave the guitar to Sarah. "Music isn't about ownership," he told her as she cradled the instrument like a sleeping child. "It's about Connection. Your brother's voice lives in this guitar, and it should go home. Sarah's tears fell onto the worn wood, and Kurt swore he saw the carved letters Liam glow one final time before fading back into the natural grain of the instrument. The guitar that wouldn't play had taught them all something profound, that love transcends death, that music transcends time, and that sometimes the most beautiful songs are the ones shared in silence between souls who understand that pain and beauty are often the same thing. In the end, it wasn't about the guitar at all. It was about remembering that every instrument, every song, every moment of connection carries the ghost of everyone who came before and the promise of everyone yet to come.